Okay. All right. I can get started now. We're at 3:05, so see if we can get started. So those of you that are here attending, welcome to our webinar. We're going to be talking about coding robots during distance learning. So thanks for coming. So I want to just quickly introduce the folks that are kind of involved putting this together. We have Andy and Dean from iDesign Solutions. They're the ones that we partnered with for the webinar, and they can tell you folks a little bit about what they do. So let's start with
Go ahead, Dean.
Thanks for the intro. I'm fortunate that I work for iDesign Solutions. And one nice thing about working with iDesign is that we're not just a reseller, but we actually partner with our suppliers. So I've had the privilege of being able to work with the team at Robolink and with the Zoomy. I got one of the very first ones and was able to test it right from the start, provide a little bit of feedback, and just watch them grow and build this platform. A little bit about iDesign is we specialize in educational robotics, 3D printing, drones, coding solutions, etc. We are also a reseller of Vex Robotics, MakerBot, Robolink, of course, their drones and the Zoomy product, and much, much more. We work closely with teachers, administrators to make sure that they have the right investment in technology and professional development solutions for schools and clubs. And iDesign's been around since 2000, so that's 20 years of building trust to supply your tech ed products. One thing I can say about Robolink, their customer support is second to none. I've had very, very few issues with Zoomy, but when I do have any questions or anything, they're right there. They've got great solutions, great answers, and usually they're ahead of the curve. I don't think I've ever come across anything that was new. And the updates have been amazing to see with the Zoomy. Every time we get a new update, it's kind of like Christmas, where it's, wow, we've got new features and new things going on. And it's been really great to be part of that journey with Robolink and the Zoomy.
Cool. And then, Andy, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I just want to thank you, Dean, for that intro. I know Dean's been working very closely with Robolink to put together this webinar. He's worked with the Zoomy product quite extensively, so he knows that product inside out. And as you said, when we've been doing this for 20 years now, and customers know us for our technical support, we don't just sell the product; we support it right through to implementation and beyond. So at this point, I think we can. I don't know if you want to wait a couple more minutes. We have some people that have joined us, or do you want to just keep going with the webinar now?
Yeah. Anyone in the queue, Hansel? He's muted.
Oh.
Okay. Cool. We also have Greg here. He's the teacher that we've been working with. He's in Oakland, California at Unity High School. And he's been great. We've been doing like every week or every 2 weeks, just syncing up to see, if the setup is working, and then like what kind of snags he's getting into, so we can figure out how to solve those things. So he's going to do a little bit of a discussion at the end about his situation and answering some of the questions that I'm sure many of other teachers are going to have on the setup. And then me, I'm Wes. So I'm with Robolink, and we make the robotics kits that Dean had mentioned earlier. So I handle the product design here, and then we also have Hansel, our CEO, who's going to be making sure that things are functioning when we try them out on the call, because I'm going to give some of you, the teachers, an opportunity to remote control the Zoomy in our office over here. So obviously, all of us are in some shape or form dealing with social distancing. So when we were going to the Computer Science Teachers Association conference, it got switched to virtual. Obviously, it was this summer, and we wanted to figure out a way for our booth to be a little more hands-on now that people can't just walk up and pick up the robot and play around with it. So what we did was we made a virtual booth where you can remote control in and then control the robots. And what ended up happening was a lot of teachers asked us if they could do the setup in their class because they wanted to replicate it in their classrooms. Because I think a lot of teachers are finding that when you're teaching computer science and it's all happening on the screen rather than something physical, in addition to all of the fatigue that students are dealing with, they can lose some of that engagement when they've been sitting in front of the screen for the whole day. And so we're trying to figure out ways that they can still have that tactile aspect of coding something physical in the world. And so the presentation is basically what we did and what we've figured out so far, and also kind of, to be transparent, we're still figuring a lot of this stuff out, which is why Greg has been great, and we've been working with him and a couple other teachers on figuring out what kind of challenges there are along the way. So the first question obviously is, how can I have my students code robots during distance learning, right? And what we've found is that if you can have them remote control the robots and have it just set up in your classroom, there is still that aspect of moving something in the real world. And obviously this is not something that can work for everyone. There's certainly an equity issue that always exists in education. So there are a few unfortunate barriers we have here, but you do have to have a device, obviously, to do that. And also the student has to have some sort of connection at home. And then the student, depending on whether they're using their own device or they're using a school device, whatever that device is, we need to be able to install new software on that device. And that depends on how your school's IT department has things set up, of course. And then lastly, as Greg will attest to later, you'll have to have access to either your classroom or some sort of bigger space where wherever you're going to be hosting the robots. Some people have various levels of access to their classroom, I know. So this will obviously, your mileage may vary depending on what your situation is. So I want to start with a simple example, using just MacBooks and Windows laptops, because those are that's the easiest setup in this situation. And of course, other people might have Chromebooks or iPads, whatever the situation is. So we'll go over those kinds of devices next as well. So first, the most basic thing, of course, is the teacher and the student, right? We'll do a one-to-one first. The teacher has the Zoom call, has the host, and then the student has is in the same Zoom call, and they're going to join the call. And then the thing that we're introducing here that's different is you have another computer in your room that is also on that Zoom call, and this is going to be the computer that's connected to the robot. And so one thing you have to think about here is you're going to want to have a robot that is connected somehow without some sort of upload process, or I wouldn't recommend Bluetooth, because Bluetooth, when you have too many of them or you have just devices in the room, sometimes that connection isn't strong, and so you have to deal with that computer talking to the robot. And so in this example, I'm using a Zoomy just because that's what we have. We also would recommend something that maybe is plugged into the computer that uses radio frequency to talk to the robot. There are a couple drones that do that. Ours uses radio frequency, the Codrone Mini. And then probably don't want something like an Arduino, because the Arduino involves uploading and uploading multiple devices before the student can see their code come to life. Will definitely be pretty difficult to manage. And then the other thing too is this computer is going to be screen sharing. So the idea here is that that computer is going to be as if it's in front of the student, right? And then the next component we have here is the overhead view. We actually have a call one of the computers in this call is playing as the overhead view. So later on, one of you can actually try remote controlling the robot that we have set up here. This can be anything that can join a Zoom call, essentially. It's nice to have a mobile device for this situation because you can move it around really easily if you really need to. Your own phone works, and then you don't have to worry about like like a laptop. You would have to point it downward, and you wouldn't be able to see the screen as well. So that's why a mobile device with a rear-facing camera works well in this situation. And then what would happen in this situation one-to-one is the student would remote control in Zoom to the computer sitting in your classroom. So we'll do that example after the presentation for those of you that want to try it. But the idea is that they request remote control or you grant the student remote control, and then they can drive the robot around while having that overhead view of seeing the robot set up in your classroom. And that's it for the one-to-one example, right? So I'm going to show you what the student is going to see on their end. So this is a Zoom example. In Zoom, you remote control here on the left. If you can see my mouse, this is the computer in the teacher's classroom, and I have just Blockly pulled up here. You put some commands together, you hit run, and then they can pin the video for the overhead view on the right. In Zoom, I mean, you can even try this now during the presentation. If you click on whoever's video, you can pin that video, and then that one's going to stick over here, and then you can kind of resize these as needed. So if they run the code and they want to see it in a little higher resolution, Zoom will actually bump up the resolution if it can to show you a little bit more resolution. And then this is the robot that you'd be controlling over here. All right, and then you can drag this middle bar right here to get resize as needed. So that's a Mac or Windows laptop on the student side. So what happens if they're using a Chromebook? With a Chromebook, what we did with Greg is to have Chrome Remote Desktop set up. So that would be outside of Zoom. It's free to download. The specifics of setting that up, I won't get into that part for the presentation, but I'm going to have my contact info at the end of the presentation, so you can reach out to ask. And then I'm still working on putting together some tutorials on how to do that. But it's relatively simple. It's essentially the teacher in the classroom is going to generate a little code that they can send to the student. And then basically the student types that in, and then they're going to start remote controlling the computer over here in your classroom. Now, what happens if you have an iPad or the student has an iPad? So this one's probably the most complicated of the setups that I've tried. It's something called VNC Viewer, also free. They have a free version as long as you're not using it for business purposes. So they have a free version here. You basically have this computer running it's called the VNC server, and then the student would install an app called VNC Viewer, and then they can remote control the computer in the classroom. So now we're going to see what it looks like for two, right? Because obviously you have more than one student. So if you have two robots in the classroom, it would look like this. You've got same thing, overhead view. This is an example with Chromebooks, since Chromebooks are very common in the school setting. And so Chromebooks remote control into one computer here. Student number 2 remote controls into the other computer over here. And so you have two computers in the classroom with a robot connected to it. All right, we're going to do a Mac example here. This is, as I mentioned before, the easiest example because we've got the remote control feature built into Zoom already. So you just have to As long as they know where to find that in the interface, then you just do that, and then you'll get the, you just have to approve the remote control access. And then iPads, BNC viewer to remote control. So what does it look like with 4 robots now? That's where it gets a little crazy, right? So basically the same thing. If you think of this side right here, everything on the left, that was 2 robots. Now we're dealing with 4, right? So that's Chromebooks. This is Mac and Windows. And then this is iPads. But probably more realistically, people are on different kinds of devices, right? Some students might be using their own devices. They might be using their parents' devices. They might be using the school's devices. So more realistically, probably there's a mix of devices. So that's the part where you will have to be familiar with what your student's setup would be. So depending on what device they're on, maybe you want to have a few different options for what the students are using. So if they're on an iPad, then you have one setup for those students to use. If the students are on Mac or Windows, you have one on a Zoom call or 2 on a Zoom call. And then if you have students running Chromebooks at home, then you have one set up for them. So let me show you what this part of the setup looks like, right? So in the classroom, you'd have something like this, is what we set up over here, and Greg has some pictures of what his setup is. So you've got your 4 computers and then your driving area in this situation. And then you've got the teacher hosting the call, and then you've got your overhead view up in the corner over there, pointing at the area where the robots are driving. And one thing that I like to recommend for doing this is probably for one person, this would be the maximum number of robots you want to do, because you're managing a lot. So, oh, did somebody mention something? Feel free to ask questions, by the way, or stop me in the middle if you want to. Okay, so because you're dealing with a lot of devices here, what I would recommend is to have stickers on each of these. So if you've got 4 robots here, let's say it's red, green, blue, yellow, I would put a sticker on the computer and a sticker on the robot. That way you know which one's talking to which, rather than having to, look it up somewhere or try to figure that out, because then you can just look at it and see which one is what is being controlled by which student. Okay, there's a couple recommendations as well. Oh, actually, let me show you Greg's setup here. So really, really easy setup just to get started. He has the mat on the floor here, and then you can see the box right here that he taped the phone to. But you can also get something fancy like this, which is what he got. I think it arrived a couple days ago for him. This thing was, Greg, was it 20? You said it was 23?
Yes, $23 at Amazon.
Yeah, so $23 on Amazon for something like this. You can also use, just something that sits on the table and lean it into that kind of thing. Do I recommend more than 4 robots? I would say only go more than 4 robots if you have the assistants to do it. When it works really well, and it's really enjoyable. But when it doesn't work, obviously you've got a lot of tech to deal with, and so it's not a solution that'll work for everyone. If you have assistants in your school, or if you're running the setup at home, I would recommend having, if a family member is free to swap batteries or restart robots if something needs to be restarted, or approving remote requests, that's helpful. And then in terms of the ratio, I would probably recommend 1 to every 3 to 4 robots. And then depending on how comfortable you are, you can do more. But definitely start small is what I would recommend. That way you can spend most of the time just focusing on the content itself, right? So a few like general recommendations. Split screen will be useful for the kids. You'll want to have them understand how to set up the Zoom video on the left and then the coding on the right, for example. That way you can mess around with the code, hit run, and then they'll see it in the overhead view, moving the robot. And then I would recommend pairing students up, and Greg's going to talk about this too. It's useful because, I mean, I'm sure many of you teach computer science anyway, so it's useful, of course, for thinking out loud, pair programming, and then, of course, it requires fewer devices, which means fewer failure points, right? Use Zoom's breakout rooms. If you are familiar with the breakout rooms, essentially you can just send, 2 students into a breakout room, and then send that overhead view into that room as well, and the remote control computer that they're going to be controlling. So send those into a breakout room and then give them access so that you can have groups going on without people talking over each other, of course. If you're going, larger scale, you probably want to have an overhead view for each breakout room if you're going to be doing groups of people. So let me show you what that would look like in the diagram here. So you probably want to put one for each setup, right? So maybe this pair right here is for 2 students, and then you have maybe another overhead view for another pair of students, and you would basically send those 2 into the breakout room if you're using the Zoom remote control situation. If you're not using the Zoom remote control, then obviously you don't have to worry about sending the overhead view into, or sending the remote control computer into the breakout room, because it's separate from Zoom. The other recommendation I mentioned before is have an assistant. You're dealing with a lot of technology at once, and you, as a teacher, you want to focus on teaching and the content and facilitating the class, of course. And then the other one is name the computers. So if there's a computer in the call that's meant for remote control, give it the name that matches what it's supposed to be. That way you can, on the Zoom call, you can click into the right one and then request remote control on that computer. If it just says like, MacBook or Chromebook, it's not going to be as clear which one they should be controlling. Even more useful would be to just give it the name of the color and then give it the robot that it's connected to. So the example that we're gonna have here is I just named it Pink Zoomy. So in the overhead view, I can see the laptop and I can see the robot. They both have the pink sticker on it. And then the last point I mentioned a couple times already is labeling. That way, when things are not working the way that the student expects them to, and they want some help, you can see, oh, this student's controlling this computer, which means that they're talking to this robot. And then the last thing and most important, I think, is if you're going to try this, simulate it and test it a bunch. If you have family members, if you have other faculty that you can have help out to role play as the student, try the whole setup and then see where things might not work and then figure out a plan B for those situations. Because when it works, it's really fun, like I mentioned, but when it doesn't work, it can definitely be a pain to have to troubleshoot. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg to just kind of introduce himself, and then I'll ask him a couple of questions that he can talk about that I have right here.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Butler. I'm the computer science teacher over at Unity High School in Oakland. And yeah, as you saw, my picture is pretty much the layout. I just, at that point, I did not order the gooseneck for the camera, which was my second cell phone. And basically, I used some blue tape and the box that the zoomies came in to do this. And then the other thing for identification is I use a post-it note at that point. And as you might, when you get your zoomies, you recognize that the top has got the ability to put Legos on there. So you can use, if you've got, I'm sure you're like me, you've got some Legos laying around, you can use that as identifiers for your individual robots. In my case, the problem I've got is we're distance learning, right? I've got 98 sophomores learning computer science principles. And for the most part, they're disengaged. I mean, they're showing up to class, but it's like, ho-hum, why am I even interested in computer science, right? And therefore, we have the Zoomies, because that definitely drives engagement. Once you have a robot or something of that ilk, the kids get excited, like, oh, I want my turn, right? And so right now, I'm basically in the prototyping stage. I've got a couple of students that have gone on campus because they needed some additional support, and I had them drive. So there's several modes, right? One where you can just do Blockly, one where you can do Python, and one where you can just drive like a remote control. And they've been working in the remote control mode because I just had them for a few moments, and I just wanted to give them a taste of what they could do, and they got real excited about that. Later on, I'm going to plan on them basically navigating the map and having some challenges, right? So I want them to understand what sequences are, and then that there's a bit of lag. You'll notice because of the camera and the zoom that there's about a half to 2 second lag depending on your configuration, which is good because basically I'm trying to model this after the Mars rover type scenario, and so that going too fast doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then obviously making the case for planning out your challenge before you just go drive all over the place. Yeah. The good thing is the mat is flat, so they can run without destroying anything. But you do want them to have a goal in place. Yeah. Any questions about what I talked about so far?
If any of you don't have questions, I do have some of these questions I think that many of you would be able to relate to. So Greg, can you talk a little bit about are you hybrid? Are you all remote? Are any of the students able to come in?
So we're pretty much remote. I've got 98 sophomores. So I'm teaching all of them. I do have a few that we bring in for additional support for one reason or another, whether the computer broke or the Wi-Fi is not good at home, or they're really, really in peril of not graduating, then we'll bring them in. But for the most part, everybody's off campus and they're using Chromebooks at home.
Right. Gotcha. And then how does your scheduling work? Is it like 2 days a week with certain students, or is it every day?
Yeah, that's a fluid, very fluid. It's more demand based because, as you imagine, we cannot populate the classrooms entirely. We basically have 4 kids per classroom with a tutor, so it's a pricey endeavor, but we're doing it because those kids need support.
Right.
So basically, we've got about 6 classrooms going on right now because there's a budget as to what we can sustain with tutors, right? So they come on campus for half a day. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're just trying to get our most vulnerable students across the finish line.
Right. And then for in terms of level of access to the classroom, are I saw that you had the picture that we showed was in your classroom, but you mentioned earlier that you're probably moving that at home right now, right?
Right. I'm probably moving this to my garage at this hour because we're seeing that many students, the end of the quarter is coming up and many of the students need additional support. So access to my classroom is becoming even more and more limited. I can get there between 8 and 9 most days. We don't start our classes online till 10 a.m. But most kids, as you know, high schoolers, getting up at 8 is a difficult proposition. I'm going to try and push for something at between 4 and 5 to see if I can get that. But I've got to prove that through the principal.
Yeah. So yeah, like Greg mentioned, if you have an open enough space, like in a garage or you know, large enough space in the living room, that might be a good place to set up the picture that I mentioned with the diagram of just like a driving area, and then some computers around it, and then the overhead view. And Greg, what were you, I guess this is actually, I don't know the answer to this one. What concepts specifically are you trying to cover with doing robotics specifically?
Yeah, so this is CSP, right? Computer science principles. So they basically have no knowledge, right? So we're just trying to get them to understand the basics, right? Iteration, sequencing, control, right? So if they understand if-thens and sequences and finish the challenges, the goal is met, right? But this is a fun way to do that, right? Because nobody gets excited saying, oh, we're going to learn about if-then-else clauses. Nobody gets excited about that. We're going to drive robots, sign me up, right?
Yeah. Cool.
That's what that's all about. It's all about the level of engagement, and that's what this is going to be about. And then, of course, we've got two. So as soon as you have two, you've got competition, right? Whether it's capture the flag or whatever we come up with, I'll let the students come up with whatever game they want to do. Maybe it's just a basic race where you finish, you know, 2 challenges, and then get to the finish line.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And how many students? Since you mentioned you have 2. And you're working with 98 students. What's the plan for how you're going to have people?
Yes. Again, that's going to be basically class participation, right? Right now, they're pretty quiet. So the more they participate, then they get their names into a lottery, and then I'll have a week where I'll have, it's going to be robot week, and so I'll spend the whole hour, and so I'll have pairs of 2, and basically I'll give them 5 minutes each. And hopefully the switchover won't be too bad. And I haven't done this yet. I'm still, like you said, in the preliminary modes with staff to just make sure I get the kinks out. And then I'll have, you know, hopefully 10 pairs go off, and that'll cover the class, right? Assuming that they've earned the right to drive the robot.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm trying to do, is build up that excitement. So I'll probably next week have a demo in each of my periods, so the kids can see, oh, this is what this is about, and this is what, because you got to wet their taste, right? It's like, oh, what are we playing for, right?
Gotcha. How many students are in each period?
Yeah, so 25, right, roughly.
Gotcha. And then lastly, what kind of challenges have you faced yourself, and then what do you think other teachers are probably going to face with this whole setup?
It's basically writing stuff down, right? As to what do you do in what order. It takes a good 20 minutes to get it all sorted out. So you obviously, once you get it sorted out, you know what to do. But the first go around, it's like, okay, this connects to that, this connects to that, and then something times out. So I had my MacBook. If I don't touch it in 10 minutes, I save battery, and so it shuts down. And now, of course, that's the center of the universe because it's hosting the Zoom call, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to start everything up again. So set your timeouts for an hour for everything, whether it's MacBooks, Chromebooks, etc. So you don't say, same thing with my phone, right? And then I lost the overhead view.
Yeah, especially that reminds me, with the overhead view, you probably want to have that plugged in if it's running mobile.
Yeah, and same thing with your robots. You do want to have that. They burn through the battery quickly. I haven't run them for more than half an hour, and they were already down to about 27%. I don't know where I started with whether they were full charge or not, but yeah, definitely want to make sure they're fully charged before you go to town.
Yeah. Cool. So does anyone else have any questions for Greg before I was thinking I wanted to actually have whoever is willing to remote control one of the robots we have set up here. Anybody have any questions for Greg? Alrighty. Okay.
Everybody wants to drive.
Yeah.
I don't blame them.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna do is so I'm gonna stop the presentation sharing, and then we're gonna share the computer that is talking to the Zoom meet. that we have set up. So does anyone want to try controlling the robot? You can just say me, or, you know, thumbs up on Zoom and let me know. If not, I might have Greg do it. All right.
You can't break it, and you won't get a ticket or a DUI unless you started drinking already.
All right. I'm gonna have then Greg. Let's have you remote control. So Hansel, can you grant Greg remote control? So in Zoom, what you're gonna do is go to on the computer that you want the person to control. Your in the Zoom call in this setup, you would basically grant remote control access to the student. So right now, Greg is acting as the student. So let's, yeah, Greg, you can
connected.
do whatever you'd like to with the Zoomy. And for those of you that are watching in the Zoom call, you can pick what video you want to look at. So you can either right click, or there's that the three little dot menu on the right. You can click that and then pin the video. And so you're going to look for the overhead view. That way you can see where the robot's moving.
Can everybody see that I'm? So if you can, hopefully you can all see the Zoomy shot, right? He's looking at that orange cone, and I'm now pressing the right arrow, and I can go forwards towards that cone, or I can go left, right? And I can go forward again. So there he is, right? There's a bit of lag, right? I can go over. So that's that mode, right? With the camera on. And I can back up and rotate. So it's basic stick control. There's a bit of lag, so you don't go too crazy about it. And there we go. And so now we're back on the road, and we can go forward a bit. And this is where I'm going to have the kids have a challenge as to where, navigate and go to, let's say this building, then that building, and then turn on the lights on the LEDs and then go back. So they'll be able to navigate by driving first and get a lay of the land, right? And then let's say, okay, once you get that, then we'll actually go into code mode, right? Where they actually can have the choice between the Blockly and the Python. But we're just going to go with the Blockly project. And we'll just call it test for now. And my robot left the world. Where did he go? Oh, he's over there. Okay. Right. And so like most Blockly, right, you've got your left-hand side where you've got your driving blocks. You click here, and you've got lots of options, right? So you've got forward, right? And then you got turn left. And you just stack them together like you normally would with any block, right? And so instead of 0 seconds, obviously that doesn't make not so interesting. So 2 seconds, right? And click run. And there he goes. Oh, I've got a little bit of a tether. Did I run out of electricity? Is that what's going on?
I think the battery was a little bit low, so just to be safe.
Give me a little juice. So running that again.
Yeah, so for those of you that aren't seeing the Zoomy, there's that list of participants in Zoom's interface. You can look for the one that says overhead view. And so the student would basically pin that video so that they always see that one when they're remote controlling.
And then I can play with the lights. I can turn on the headlights on and off. With a little bit of a timing loop here. There we go. There we go. So I'll start with the light on. Oops.
Yeah, so you can do for especially at like the Blockly level, you can do little challenges like, you know, you can have you or the assistant puts the Zoomy in a certain location and then navigate to another location.
There he is, right? I think the tether is a bit too much drag for him to go anywhere. The USB cable is a little bit too much drag for him to overpower.
And so,
And yeah,
yeah, go
the
ahead.
plus is that nobody can really get hurt. It won't run off the world and hurt anybody.
Mhm. And so obviously this isn't limited to Zoomy or, you know, even our products. As long as you can have the computer talk to you know, a robot in the classroom, then, and you're not doing some sort of upload process, you can do this with whatever robot you'd like. I mentioned earlier, for those of you that weren't here earlier in the presentation, you probably don't want to use a Bluetooth robot just because there's too many Bluetooth tends to interfere and get disconnected if there are too many devices, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. When you have too many Bluetooth devices in the room, sometimes the connection's not stable. If you're finding that that's not an issue, then totally go for it with a Bluetooth robot. But that's just something that we've noticed, even in person. It seems to be an issue, and so if you can eliminate that from the equation, it'll make things a little bit more smooth.
Wes, there's a question on the chat asking whether the program has option for the text coding.
Oh yeah, sure.
And meanwhile, sorry, but I accidentally turned off Zoomy, so I'm gonna reconnect it while you're asking for.
So if you can see the Zoomy code, right? I built it in blocks, and then it converts it to Python code.
Yeah. So for those of you that are working with students doing text-based coding, for this particular robot, if the question is about Zoomy itself, yes, there's Python coding. You can open a Jupyter notebook and then do Python coding in there. That part for us is actually a little bit more developed because obviously we have to write the library itself in Python. And so in order for us to get it to work with Blockly, we have to.
Do you have a notebook that's already with a demo?
No, you'd probably have to go to one of the Learn page lessons. I don't know if is the Zoomy still alive?
Let's go back.
অ্যাপয়েন্টমেন্ট নিলাম তো চুল কাটার জন্য কিন্তু ভিতরে বলছে
I think someone's microphone is on. All right. Any other questions? We're at 3:47. Well, 3:47 over here on the West Coast, but we're at about 13 minutes before the end. I basically kept the end of the session open for questions for those of you that want to ask, either about the setup itself or about Zoomy itself, or maybe for the folks at iDesign Solutions.
One thing that you haven't demoed, and I don't have enough battery left to do it, but at least people should know the work you've done with the gestures, where you've basically working with AI, where you can program different gestures to control the robot. That was really, yeah, right there, really fantastic.
Oh, that one, yeah. It might not work in this setup because we have it set up a little bit differently for this call. But yeah, it's basically a so Zoomy itself, yeah, we're trying to teach about what artificial intelligence is, and so we have a couple demos. We're going to be adding more and more, but basically the idea is that it's kind of like a wizard in the kind of like in Windows when you have like different screens that help you install a program. So it's sort of like that format where you collect data and then you go to the next step and then you use that data to do different little activities. So that's one of the things that we have on the Zoomy. Yeah. If you have other questions, feel free to ask now, or you can post them in the chat. I think Hansel's checking that right now in case I miss anything. Let me also bring this back up. There we go. So can you turn the screen share off on the Zoomy laptop?
Yes, I just did.
Okay, cool. Can you see the presentation again?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can see your slides.
All right. So in terms of the details of the different pieces of software I mentioned, there was Chrome Remote Desktop and there was VNC Viewer. Those I'm going to be putting together tutorials on those as well. But this is sort of like a general overview of the concept here, so that you can get started if you want to try it out. So right now, if you are setting it up in your school and you want to ask questions along the way, feel free to contact me by email. Right now, I'm just kind of doing it case by case because I think it's something that I know a lot of teachers are dealing with. And then the slides that we went through today are available at this URL. And we're also recording the presentation as well, so you can look at the presentation. But the slides at that URL, they're the same slides except with more detail. So everything I said will actually be written out there as well. Yeah. Any questions for me or for Greg or for the folks at iDesign? I see a message in the chat. Oh, you're welcome, Nancy. She said thank you. Cool. Alrighty, if there are no more questions, we can end early, and we'll be sending the presentation and the recordings to everyone too. So you'll be able to access the information. And again, my email's right on there. Feel free to ask me questions. We're doing this just because I think people need it. Yeah, we're not trying to, in this case, we're not trying to sell some sort of package with the remote control setup. You can use it for whatever robots you have.
Thank you very much. Looks great.
Yeah, thank you, Wesley. Thank you, Greg. Very informative, and
Alrighty,
have a great day.
thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.